Incredible. Congratulations to her and her family.
Yeah.
Like the crazy thing is I'm just seeing her last year when they played LSU, but she's phenomenal. I'm going to go on the record and say she's the best female collegiate player ever.
Ever?
Well,
Caitlin Clark just did something that no athlete has done since Michael Jordan.
So, Caitlin Clark is the fourth most marketable athlete in the world. Yeah, not just female athlete, not just in the United States, but in the entire world.
Like, no one ever said there weren't ever great players before Caitlin Clark. There was never phenomenon, not in my lifetime, with women's basketball. And I went to UConn. So I've seen plenty of great players, but nobody's ever moved the needle in my lifetime like
Caitlin Clark's signature basketball, making her the first athlete since Michael Jordan to get their own signature basketball from Wilson. She also becomes the first WNBA player to get her own signature basketball.
Thousands of basketballs. Gone. In 40 minutes flat. Not at a sneaker convention, not at a limited edition sports drop event, but online, quietly, without warning. And the person responsible wasn't Michael Jordan, wasn't LeBron James, wasn't any male athlete with decades of cultural clout behind them. It was a 22-year-old rookie from Iowa who had barely finished her first professional season. Caitlin Clark just pulled off something that the sports world hadn't seen since the 90s, and the ripple effects are still being felt across the entire landscape of women's basketball. But here's the part nobody's talking about loudly enough. The deal that caused this frenzy didn't just break sales records. It broke something else entirely. It cracked open a conversation that the WNBA had been quietly avoiding for years, about money, about power, about who gets to be the face of a league, and what happens when that person arrives before the league is ready for them. Veterans are fired up. Sponsors are paying attention. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, Ja Wilson, the reigning MVP, the most decorated active player in the league, is watching all of this unfold. And she has thoughts. Target, 900 words. To understand why this deal hit differently, you have to understand what it actually is, because on the surface, a basketball partnership sounds straightforward. An athlete, a sporting goods company, a product line. Simple, right? But the moment you dig into the details of what Wilson's sporting goods actually offered Caitlin Clark, the picture becomes something far more significant than a standard endorsement. Wilson has been making basketballs since 1913. Over more than a century of operation, the company has outfitted professional leagues, college programs, and backyard courts across the world. Their name is stamped on the official ball of the NBA. Their products have been touched by the greatest players to ever lace up sneakers. And in all of that time, across more than 100 years of basketball history, Wilson had only ever given one athlete their own signature basketball line. One Michael Jordan, that's the list, until now. Caitlin Clark just joined it. The collection is called the Inspire Series, and the name alone tells you that this wasn't put together as a quick cash grab. Wilson and Clark clearly sat down and thought about what this line was supposed to mean, who it was supposed to reach, and what story it was supposed to tell. Because every single ball in the collection connects directly to something real about who Clark is as a player and as a person. This isn't a logo slapped on a rubber sphere. These are products with actual narrative behind them. Take the tribute ball. It's a direct nod to Clark's time at the University of Iowa, the program where she became a legend, where she shattered scoring records that had stood for decades, where she turned women's college basketball into must-watch television and did it in a state that doesn't exactly sit at the center of the sports media universe. Iowa isn't New York. It isn't Los Angeles. And that's the point. The tribute ball is a reminder that greatness doesn't require a major market, and Clark proved that as loudly as anyone ever has. Then there's the Dreamer Ball, which is arguably the most personal piece in the collection. Designed specifically to speak to young athletes, kids who are sitting in driveways right now, shooting at hoops nailed above garage doors, imagining what it might feel like to play at the highest level, this ball carries a message that goes well beyond basketball. It tells those kids that their dreams are worth pursuing, that someone at the very top of the sport sees them and wants them to keep going. That kind of messaging matters. It builds loyalty in a demographic that will be purchasing sports products for the next 50 years. The threes-up ball might be the most technically interesting piece of the collection. Clark's shooting range is genuinely absurd by any standard, men's or women's. She forces defenders to guard her from distances that most players wouldn't even attempt a shot from, let alone consistently make. The threes-up ball leans directly into that, celebrating the part of her game that has defenders losing sleep and coaches drawing up entirely new defensive schemes. It's a bold choice. It essentially says, here is the thing that makes her impossible to stop, and we're putting it on a ball. The record breaker speaks for itself. Clark entered the WNBA having already dismantled some of the most untouchable records in college basketball history. The all-time NCAA scoring record, previously held by Pete Maravich, a man who played in an era without a three-point line, fell to a 21-year-old woman from Ames, Iowa. The record breaker ball is a permanent marker of that achievement, a physical object that says this happened, and you can hold it in your hands. And then there's the crowd maestro. This one might be the most revealing of all because it captures something that statistics can't fully measure. Walk into any arena where Caitlin Clark is playing, and the energy is different. The noise level is different. The crowd composition is different. Families, casual fans, people who hadn't previously owned a single piece of WNBA merchandise are showing up, wearing her number, holding signs, losing their minds over a mid-range jumper. Clark doesn't just play basketball well, she makes people feel something. The crowd maestro ball acknowledges that specific, rare, almost indefinable quality that separates good players from cultural phenomena. The collection is available in sizes 3 and 6, which means it's designed for everyone from small children just learning to dribble all the way up to serious players running half-court games. That's intentional. Clark's audience isn't narrow. It never has been. And Wilson, to their credit, built a product line that reflects the actual breadth of the fanbase she's created. What this deal represents structurally is a statement from one of the most established sporting goods companies on the planet that Caitlin Clark belongs in a category occupied by exactly one other person in basketball history. That's not marketing hyperbole. That's Wilson, a company that has operated for over a century, making a calculated business decision based on what they see in the market. And what happened next confirmed that their instincts were right. Here's a number that puts everything into perspective. 40 minutes. That's how long it took for the entire Wilson Inspire series collection to completely sell out after it went live online. Not 40 hours, not 40 days, 40 minutes. Every single ball, across every size, across every design in the collection, gone. Wilson's website effectively collapsed under the demand, and fans who had been waiting to purchase were left staring at out-of-stock notifications before most of them had even finished reading about the collection's launch. To understand why that number is so staggering, it helps to put it next to some other sellout events that the internet has collectively lost its mind over in recent years. When Sony launched the PlayStation 5, it became one of the most chaotic retail moments in modern consumer history. People were setting alarms, refreshing pages at 3 a.m, using bots to try to snag units before human beings even had a chance to click the buy button. The PS5 sellout was a global event covered by mainstream news outlets. It was the kind of demand that gaming companies spend years trying to manufacture. Clark's basketballs moved faster. Let that settle for a second. A signature basketball collection from a first-year WNBA player cleared inventory at a speed that outpaced one of the most anticipated consumer electronics launches in recent memory. And unlike the PS5, there were no bots artificially inflating the demand. These were real people, making real purchases because they genuinely wanted to own something connected to Caitlin Clark. Wilson has openly acknowledged that they underestimated the demand. That's a significant admission from a company that has been in the sporting goods business for over 100 years, and that presumably has access to considerable market research and sales forecasting data. They had the numbers on Clark, the viewership figures, the attendance data, the social media engagement metrics, and they still weren't prepared for what happened when the collection went live. That tells you something important about the gap between what analytics can predict and what Clark's cultural presence actually generates in the real world. The comparison to Michael Jordan's product launches in the 80s and 90s isn't just a convenient talking point for commentators trying to generate engagement. It reflects something genuinely similar in the mechanics of what's happening. When Jordan released new products during his playing career, there was a purchasing frenzy that went far beyond basketball fans. People who had never watched an NBA game were lining up outside stores because owning a Jordan product felt like participating in something larger than sports. It felt like being connected to a cultural moment. Clark is generating that same energy, and she's doing it in a sport that many of the people currently buying her products had never previously paid attention to. The cultural significance of this extends well beyond the sales figures themselves. What the sellout demonstrates is that Clark has broken through the barrier that most athletes spend their entire careers trying to breach, the barrier between sports fan and general consumer. The people who bought out that Wilson collection weren't all die-hard WNBA followers who had been tracking the league for years. Many of them were casual observers, parents who had watched her NCAA tournament runs with their kids, people who had caught highlights on social media and felt drawn in by something they couldn't quite name. Clark converted that passive interest into active purchasing behavior at a speed that even her most enthusiastic supporters hadn't anticipated. There's also a financial wave that radiates outward from a sellout event like this one. Wilson doesn't just benefit from the immediate sales. The brand visibility that comes from a collection selling out in 40 minutes is worth considerably more than the revenue from those initial transactions. Every article written about the sellout is free advertising. Every social media post from a fan showing off their new ball is organic marketing that no budget can reliably replicate. The story of the sellout becomes its own marketing event, drawing attention from consumers who missed the initial launch and creating urgency for the next drop. For the WNBA and women's basketball more broadly, the financial implications are hard to overstate. For years, the argument against significant investment in women's sports marketing was rooted in a circular logic. The market isn't there, therefore we won't invest, therefore the market won't grow. Clark is dismantling that argument in real time with receipts. The market is clearly there. It was always there. What was missing was a player who could activate it at this scale, and now that player exists, and the data is undeniable. Veterans around the league have watched this unfold with complicated emotions. Some have been generous in their acknowledgement of what Clark has accomplished. Others have been less so, and their frustration, while understandable on a human level, points to something deeper than simple jealousy. It points to a system that spent years telling elite female athletes that this level of commercial response simply wasn't possible for their sport. And now that it's happening, the players who were told to accept those limits are watching a rookie rewrite them entirely. The sellout was more than a sales event, it was proof of concept. And once proof of concept exists at this scale, nothing about the conversation around women's basketball marketing can stay the same. The question now was what the people inside the league were going to do about it, and not everyone had the same answer. Picture this: you are one of the most marketable athletes on the planet. Not one of the most marketable female athletes, one of the most marketable athletes, full stop, in any sport, in any country. Your games are drawing over 1 million viewers on average. Your signature products sell out faster than gaming consoles. Your name is being mentioned alongside Michael Jordan and Tiger Woods in conversations about athletes who fundamentally changed the economics of their sport. Sponsors are lining up, deals are being signed. The money is flowing. And your league paycheck is $76,000. That is Caitlin Clark's reality right now, and it is one of the most jarring financial contradictions in the history of professional sports. The estimated gap between what Clark earns from endorsements, figures that analysts have placed in the range of $11 million annually, and what she takes home from the Indiana Fever sits at roughly 144 to 1. For every dollar she earns playing professional basketball, she's making approximately $144 from the brands that want her face attached to their products. She is, by any reasonable financial analysis, the most underpaid employee in the building at every single WNBA game she plays. Now, to be fair, this isn't unique to Clark in the sense that WNBA salaries have always lagged far behind what male players earn in comparable leagues. That's a structural issue that predates Clark by decades, and one that advocates for women's sports have been raising loudly for years without sufficient response. The league operates under a collective bargaining agreement that sets salary caps, and those caps were negotiated in an environment where the commercial landscape of women's basketball looked fundamentally different than it does today. The system was not designed for a player who could triple attendance numbers by simply walking through an arena entrance. But what makes Clark's situation different from the general WNBA pay conversation is the sheer scale of the disparity. Most WNBA players who earn endorsement income do so at figures that, while higher than their league salaries, don't create this kind of canyon between on-court and off-court compensation. Clark's case is extreme precisely because her commercial value has outpaced the league's ability to compensate her at a rate anywhere close to reflecting her actual market worth. She is generating hundreds of millions of dollars in value for the WNBA through viewership, attendance, and sponsorship attraction. And the league is paying her a figure that wouldn't cover a year's rent in most major American cities. The ripple effects of this contradiction are being felt throughout the locker rooms of every team in the league. Veterans who have spent a decade building the foundation that Clark now performs on, players who sacrificed seasons of potential earnings to help keep the league afloat during its less commercially successful years, are watching a rookie earn in endorsements what they will never see in their entire careers combined. That's not a comfortable thing to sit with, regardless of how talented the rookie is or how much she deserves her commercial success. The pay gap conversation has also exposed a tension in how the league has historically framed its own value. For years, the WNBA's marketing approach emphasized the collective, the league as a whole, the sport, the mission of women's basketball, rather than any individual star. That approach made sense in an environment where no single player was generating Jordan-level commercial interest. But Clark's arrival has demonstrated that star power, individual brand, and personality-driven marketing can move the needle in ways that collective messaging simply cannot replicate at the same speed or scale. The league's structural resistance to superstar economics is now colliding head-on with the reality of what Caitlin Clark actually is. What's particularly striking is how Clark herself has responded to this imbalance. She hasn't made public complaints about her salary. She hasn't positioned herself against the league or against her teammates. Instead, she's used whatever leverage her commercial success has given her to push for improvements that benefit everyone in the WNBA, not just herself. The charter flight situation is the clearest example of this. WNBA players had been flying commercial for years, dealing with the logistical chaos of commercial travel while trying to maintain the physical demands of a professional sports season. Clark's rising profile gave the conversation about charter flights a new urgency, and within a remarkably short timeframe, the situation changed. All teams now travel by charter. Every player in the league benefits from that, including the ones who have been most publicly critical of Clark's presence. The $200 million media rights deal that brought WNBA games into primetime broadcasts is another outcome that traces at least partially back to Clark's impact on the league's commercial viability. That money doesn't just go to Clark. It flows through the entire organization, affecting salaries, resources, facilities, and the overall health of the league. Clark is, in a very real sense, funding improvements for the same players who have pushed back hardest against her rise. The pay structure itself, however, remains unchanged, and analysts who follow women's sports economics closely are watching to see whether Clark's situation creates enough pressure to force a renegotiation of how the WNBA compensates its most valuable assets. If a player can be worth $11 million in endorsements while drawing a $76,000 salary, something in the system is going to have to give eventually. The only question is when, and whether the league will choose to get ahead of it or wait until the pressure becomes impossible to ignore. A'ja Wilson did not become the WNBA's most decorated active player by accident. 2 MVP awards, a championship, consistently elite statistical performance across multiple seasons. By any objective basketball measure, Wilson is the best player in the league, and she has been for years. She earned that status through relentless work, through seasons of carrying a franchise, through performances that should have, and did, among those paying attention, demanded national recognition. So when the conversation around the WNBA began to center almost entirely on a rookie who hadn't yet played a single professional game, it would be surprising if Wilson felt nothing about it. Rumors and fan speculation online have suggested that Wilson's reaction to Clark's explosive commercial rise has been more than just professional acknowledgement of a talented newcomer. Reports circulating across sports media and social platforms indicate that frustration has built up among veteran players over the perception that Clark's marketing dominance has effectively overshadowed everything they built. It's worth being clear that much of this is speculative. The exact nature of Wilson's private feelings isn't something that's been fully documented in public statements. But the broader pattern of veteran discomfort with Clark's rise is not speculation. It's documented, it's visible, and it's been commented on by some of the most prominent voices in basketball. Charles Barkley's intervention in this conversation was particularly notable. Barkley, who has never been accused of holding back his opinions, went on record saying that the WNBA's handling of the Caitlin Clark situation was as poorly managed as anything he'd seen in sports administration. His specific framing, that the league couldn't have made it worse if they had tried, was a pointed critique not just of individual players, but of the organizational culture that allowed tensions to escalate rather than managing them proactively. Barkley isn't someone who makes those kinds of statements lightly, and his willingness to name the problem publicly gave the conversation a weight that it might not have carried otherwise. The on-court dimension of this tension has been one of the more uncomfortable aspects of Clark's rookie year. Multiple analysts and commentators have pointed out that the physicality directed at Clark during games went beyond what could be reasonably explained by competitive basketball tactics. Double teams and hard fouls are standard parts of the game, particularly for players who have demonstrated the ability to take over possessions. But the pattern of contact directed at Clark in certain situations was described by observers, including former players and coaches, as carrying a personal dimension that went beyond tactical decision-making. Sheryl Swoopes, a legendary figure in women's basketball whose opinions carry considerable weight in how the sport's history is framed, had been among the more skeptical voices regarding Clark's credentials before her professional debut. The suggestion in some quarters was that Clark's hype was at least partly a product of factors beyond pure basketball merit, a claim that Clark's actual performance, both in college and in her rookie professional season, has made increasingly difficult to sustain. Swoopes ultimately shifted her position, acknowledging Clark's commercial impact in terms that reflected a genuine reassessment rather than grudging politeness. The dynamic this creates is genuinely complex, and it deserves to be treated as such rather than reduced to a simple narrative of jealousy. These are elite professional athletes who have dedicated their lives to a sport that has historically received a fraction of the attention and resources directed at men's basketball. Many of them watched the WNBA struggle for survival during seasons when attendance was low, when television deals were minimal, when the general sports media treated women's basketball as a secondary story at best. They built something under difficult conditions, and they did it without the kind of commercial support that Clark is receiving as a rookie. The frustration isn't irrational. It's the frustration of people who were told for years that the commercial ceiling for their sport was low, who accepted those limits and worked within them, and who are now watching those limits evaporate for someone else. The fact that Clark's success is ultimately good for the entire league, which the data strongly supports, doesn't make the emotional experience of watching it happen any easier for players who were never given the same platform. What's been remarkable about Clark's own handling of this situation is the consistency of her public composure. She hasn't responded to criticism from veterans with counterattacks. She hasn't positioned herself as being in conflict with the players who have been most resistant to her rise. She shows up, she plays, she performs at an extraordinary level, and she lets the numbers make her argument for her. That approach, which could be read as strategic or as simply a reflection of her character, has actually made her more compelling to the broader public rather than less. The speculation about where A'ja Wilson's head is at continues to fuel online discussion in ways that are frankly good for the visibility of the WNBA, whether anyone in the league wants to acknowledge that or not. Every time the question of veteran reactions to Clark surfaces in mainstream media, it brings new eyeballs to a league that desperately needs them. The tension, uncomfortable as it is for the individuals involved, is functioning as one of the most effective ongoing story engines women's basketball has ever had. And the person sitting at the center of it, seemingly unbothered, keeps dropping 30-point games. Think about the last time you saw a major athlete's signature product placed next to the dairy section at your local supermarket. Go ahead, take a moment. You're probably drawing a blank because it essentially never happens. The standard playbook for elite athlete brand partnerships runs through luxury goods, high-end sportswear labels, energy drink companies, and premium retailers with carefully curated brand identities. The whole point of most celebrity endorsement strategy is exclusivity. The product is aspirational precisely because it's positioned somewhere above the everyday. You don't stumble across it. You seek it out. Caitlin Clark threw that playbook out entirely. Her partnership with Hy-Vee, a Midwestern grocery chain with locations spread across Iowa, Illinois, Kansas, Minnesota, Missouri, Nebraska, South Dakota, and Wisconsin, placed her signature Wilson basketballs directly in the aisles where families buy milk, eggs, bread, and everything else that gets them through the week. No velvet ropes. No exclusive retail locations. No appointment-only experiences. Just a basketball, sitting on a shelf between the ordinary things that ordinary people buy because they need them. On first hearing, this sounds either brilliantly counterintuitive or like a serious miscalculation of brand positioning. Industry analysts initially weren't sure which category it fell into. The reflexive concern was that placing a signature product in a grocery store would cheapen it, that the context of a weekly shopping run would undercut the specialness that makes a signature item worth purchasing. Those concerns, it turns out, fundamentally misread both Clark's personal brand and the audience she's actually speaking to. Here's the key insight that Clark and her team apparently understood before most marketing professionals did. The average American visits a grocery store approximately 1.6 times per week. That's not a statistic that exists in the abstract. It represents over 80 encounters per year between a consumer and the retail environment where Clark's product is sitting on the shelf. No billboard achieves that frequency. No television advertisement comes close to that repetition. No luxury retail partnership puts your product in front of a potential customer 80 times a year in a context where they're already in purchasing mode. The math on impressions alone should have made this an obvious decision, but most athletes and their management teams never get there because the conversation starts with brand prestige rather than with actual consumer behavior. Clark flipped the starting point. The question wasn't, does this partnership look good on paper? The question was, where do the people I want to reach actually spend their time? And the answer, for Middle America, the geographic and cultural territory that Clark comes from and still identifies with, is the grocery store. There's a deeper authenticity argument here that goes beyond marketing strategy. Clark grew up in Iowa. She played college basketball in Iowa. Her entire rise as a cultural figure is rooted in a region of the country that the major sports media tends to treat as a flyover zone, acknowledging only briefly before returning attention to the coasts. The Hy-Vee partnership isn't Clark reaching down to connect with Middle America. It's Clark being exactly who she already is, in exactly the places she already belongs, and building a commercial relationship that reflects that reality rather than constructing some aspirational identity that doesn't match her actual story. This authenticity is something that cannot be manufactured, and sophisticated consumers, particularly the younger ones, have increasingly sharp radar for when it's absent. Athletes who take luxury brand deals they have no genuine connection to often find that the commercial relationship feels hollow in ways that erode rather than build their personal brand. Clark's Hy-Vee collaboration feels like the opposite of that. It feels like someone saying, here is who I actually am, here is where I actually come from, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise because a different deal might look more impressive in a press release. Several veteran WNBA players, according to commentary from observers close to the league, have struggled to understand this approach, and the confusion is revealing. Players who spent years pursuing conventional sports marketing recognition, chasing the high-end deals, the major brand partnerships, the exclusive retail relationships, built their commercial strategies around an established template that said this is how you achieve market visibility. Clark essentially ignored that template and achieved more market visibility in her rookie year than most players accumulate over an entire career. The lesson embedded in that outcome is uncomfortable for anyone who followed the traditional path, because it suggests that the template itself was always limited, that the conventional approach to women's sports marketing was leaving enormous commercial potential on the table by aiming at the wrong audience in the wrong places. Clark identified a different audience, reached them in the places they actually inhabit, and generated results that the conventional playbook had never been able to produce. The Hy-Vee strategy also reinforces something important about the geography of Clark's fanbase. Her support isn't concentrated in the major coastal markets that dominate sports media coverage. It runs deep through the center of the country, through communities that feel seen by Clark in a way they rarely feel seen by professional athletes. Putting her product where those communities shop isn't just smart marketing. It's a genuine acknowledgement of where her real cultural power lives. And it's that understanding of her own position that separates Clark's commercial approach from everything that came before it in women's basketball. When Michael Jordan speaks about basketball, people listen. That's not a recent development. It has been true for 40 years, through his playing career, through his championships, through his transition into ownership, and through every phase of his cultural evolution from athlete to global icon. Jordan occupies a position in the basketball universe that is genuinely singular. His opinions carry a weight that no analyst, no former player, no commentator can match, because he isn't just someone who watched the game reach the heights it reached in the 90s. He is the reason it got there. So when Jordan publicly came out in support of Caitlin Clark, stating clearly that the WNBA should acknowledge her contributions and recognize what she's doing for women's basketball, it landed with a force that the ongoing media conversation about Clark had not previously generated at that level. This wasn't a social media post from a current player or a hot take from a television commentator looking to generate engagement. This was Michael Jordan, the person who built the commercial template that Clark is now following in women's basketball, looking at what she's doing and saying, yes, this is real, this matters, and the institution around her needs to recognize it. The significance of this endorsement operates on multiple levels simultaneously, and it's worth unpacking each of them rather than treating it as a simple celebrity cosign. First, there's the basketball credibility dimension. Jordan has seen greatness up close for his entire adult life as a participant, as an observer, and as an executive. He has no reason to offer generous assessments of players who don't merit them, and his career history suggests he has little patience for hype that outpaces actual performance. When he validates what Clark is doing on the court and in the marketplace, it comes from a foundation of genuine basketball knowledge rather than promotional interest. He isn't selling anything. He's making an assessment, and his assessments of basketball talent and commercial impact carry a credibility that is essentially unmatched in the sport. Second, there's the historical symmetry. The Jordan-Clark comparison has been a constant thread in coverage of Clark's rise, and not always in ways that have been entirely fair to the complexity of both stories. But Jordan's direct engagement with that comparison, his willingness to essentially validate it by speaking positively about Clark's impact, changes the texture of the conversation. When outside commentators draw the Jordan-Clark parallel, it can feel like hyperbole. When Jordan himself acknowledges what Clark is doing and frames it in terms of what she's contributing to the sport's history, the parallel suddenly feels like something with more substance to it. Third, and perhaps most interesting from a long-term perspective, is what Jordan's endorsement signals about how Clark is being perceived at the very highest levels of sports business. Jordan didn't build his post-playing career on empty endorsements. Every association he's maintained since retiring from the game has been deliberate. His commercial instincts are as sharp as his basketball instincts were. And the fact that he's aligned himself publicly with Clark's narrative suggests that people who understand the sports business at the deepest level see in her something with genuinely long-term commercial and cultural staying power. For the veterans who have been most skeptical of Clark's rise, Jordan's intervention is a difficult development to navigate. Dismissing the excitement around Clark as a media invention or a product of factors unrelated to basketball merit becomes considerably harder when the most credible voice in the sport's history is saying the opposite. Jordan's endorsement doesn't settle the internal WNBA debates about pay equity and competitive dynamics, but it does shift the terms of the argument in ways that are hard to reverse. There's also a generational statement embedded in Jordan's support that's easy to miss if you're focused purely on the basketball angle. Jordan came up in an era when women's basketball was entirely peripheral to the mainstream sports conversation. The WNBA didn't exist when he was winning championships. His willingness to engage seriously with what's happening in women's basketball now, to treat Clark's commercial impact as worthy of the same kind of recognition he helped establish for NBA stars, represents a meaningful signal about where the culture is moving, coming from someone who has always had exceptional instincts about cultural direction. The broader basketball community has been watching to see whether Clark's rise would be validated by figures whose opinions can't be easily dismissed, or whether the skeptical voices would gradually chip away at the narrative. Jordan's public support represents the most significant piece of external validation Clark has received from outside the immediate Caitlin Clark fan ecosystem, and it comes from a source that makes it extraordinarily difficult to characterize as hype. For Clark herself, the Jordan connection goes beyond the Wilson deal, beyond the comparison in sales figures and sellout events, beyond the parallel career trajectories that commentators have been drawing since before she played her first professional game. It now includes something more direct, the acknowledgement from Jordan himself that what she's doing is real, that its impact on the sport is genuine, and that the institution of women's basketball should be doing more to recognize it. That's a statement that will follow this story for as long as people are talking about Caitlin Clark's career, which, based on everything we've seen so far, is going to be a very long time. The stage is now set for the biggest question of all. What does the WNBA do with the moment Clark has handed it? Here's what all of this actually comes down to. Caitlin Clark didn't just sign a deal and sell some basketballs. She exposed every crack in the foundation of women's professional basketball, the outdated pay structure, the marketing timidity, the internal resistance to star power, and she did it by simply being extraordinary at a speed the league wasn't prepared for. The Wilson deal, the Hy-Vee partnership, the sellout frenzy, the pay gap outrage, the veteran tensions, Jordan's endorsement, these aren't separate stories. They're chapters of the same one. A sport meeting its defining moment and having to decide in real time whether it's going to rise to meet it or let it pass. A'ja Wilson is watching. Every veteran in the league is watching. Every sponsor who was previously hesitant about investing in women's basketball is watching. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, a 22-year-old from Iowa is just showing up to practice, putting in the work, and making history so consistently that it's starting to look almost routine. The WNBA has been handed something rare, a once-in-a-generation opportunity. The only question left is whether they're brave enough to take it.